Hello everyone, thank you for the introduction. It's the Corporate Crime Investigations and Compliance team that I work with at DLA Piper, but it's very long and convoluted, so corporate crime is absolutely fine. I'll try and make dawn raids as interesting as I possibly can. I wasn't here this morning, so I haven't heard what you've already listened to, but I'll do my very best in the pre-lunchtime graveyard shift. So rather than ingratiate myself with the audience, I'm going to be a little bit unkind. And I'm going to ask for a show of hands. Does anybody here honestly know how to handle a situation where a regulator knocks on your door at 8 o'clock in the morning, asking to see documents and seize hard drives and interview people? One? Excellent. Two? Second question, anyone aware if the organisation that they work for has a raid manual? Two? Excellent. Three? Four? Three. Has anybody read it of those three? One? Good. Any idea when it was last updated?
About 6 months ago.
6 months ago, good. And were you ever provided with any sort of specific training on it and taken through it, run-throughs?
The board was taken through it.
Almost, did you say?
The board was taken
Oh, the board, sorry. Any idea if your receptionist has some kind of crib sheet to deal with in an emergency? Okay, well, we'll skip the last question because we'll come on to that a little bit later. So why do we need to worry about dawn raids? A Freedom of Information request was made of the Financial Conduct Authority to find out how many raids they actually carry out. And the numbers obviously are there on the screen. They've gotten slightly less as time has gone on. Back in 2010 there were 36, 2011 there were 21, in 2012 there were 11, and then they ranked things up, sorry, in 2012 there were 11, and in 2013 there were 20. And so far this year there have been 12. Unfortunately, they don't necessarily give you, when you make these Freedom of Information requests, who they've actually raided, and sometimes you only find out a year or 2 or 3 later when the individuals or the banks in question have been prosecuted or convicted. But that just gives you an idea of the frequency with which one regulator, the FCA, is active in using this tool to investigate. So, as I said, we don't necessarily always know who's been raided until quite some time afterwards, but let's look at who they actually have raided that we know about. In 2010, the German prosecutors raided 13 branches of Credit Suisse in context of a tax fraud inquiry. Basically, they were looking into 5,000 clients of Credit Suisse's who were under investigation for tax evasion. After this raid, a deal was actually concluded where Credit Suisse paid out about $150 million. And sadly, they breathed a sigh of relief a little bit too soon because they launched on them again in July 2012, where they were raided again. And not only was it Credit Suisse in Germany, but the German investigators also roped in the French officials and decided to search the homes of some UBS employees at the same time. And also 3 offices of UBS in France. So just to be aware that just because one regulator is looking at it, they may also sort of join teams with other regulators in other countries and do their worst, as it were. The same year, 2010, the Financial Services Authority, as it was then known, raided Deutsche Bank, More Capital and Legal and General in the context of an insider dealing investigation. From what I've been able to glean, the Deutsche Bank raid was a little bit bloody. 8 officials turned up. They spent 2.5 hours ransacking the desk of a particular individual who had previously that day been arrested and taken to Holborn Police Station to be questioned. Simultaneously, they also raided the home of a trader in Sussex, I believe it was, and seized various, as well as arresting him, they seized various bits and pieces, including his little boy's iPod, in case there was anything hidden on that. So they know no bounds. And they also raided about 16 other addresses in and around the London area, as well as arresting a stockbroker who was coming back from his holiday at Gatwick. So that was a particularly bloody one. 2011, European Commission raided Barclays, Deutsche Bank, RBS and Societe Generale in the context of an insider dealing investigation connected with Euribor, which you've probably heard of. 2013, FCA raided Schroders. They were actually looking at a particular employee that they were interested in. It wasn't Schroders itself. And that was an insider dealing investigation, obviously, in fund management. And then same year, FCA raided Mitsuho, Japanese bank. Again, an investment banker was who they were looking at for insider dealing, and he was later convicted. And then jumping to a slightly different industry, in 2013, the European Commission conducted raids on BP, Shell, Statoil and Platts for price rigging of oil prices. And that took place in London, the Netherlands and Norway. And off the back of that, Ofgem, the regulator, and the FCA are also investigating this. So that's just a little taste of the sort of thing that's gone on that we know about. Obviously, there will be many, many other raids that are ongoing that are not in the public domain. So who has the power to actually carry out a dawn raid, and why would they do it? The answer to who, obviously we've got criminal agencies and we've got regulatory agencies. The criminal bodies that would investigate, certainly in the UK, are the SFO, or the Serious Fraud Office, and the police. And the regulatory agencies that would be carrying out dawn raids would be obviously the FCA that we've looked at already, the European Commission for Competition, the Office of Fair Trading, HMRC for tax inquiries, Health and Safety Executive, the Information Commissioner, and BIS, the Department for Business Innovation and Skills. And why do they deploy this tool? Well, quite simply, it's the element of surprise. As you've seen already from the previous slide, they love to carry out repeated raids. They like to carry out simultaneous raids over different jurisdictions because they don't want to give you the opportunity of knowing what's coming. And they don't want to run the risk that somebody's going to get the shredder out or start deleting hard drives and so forth. So the element of surprise is obviously a big reason for carrying out a dawn raid, which allows them to obtain evidence where they fear that it's going to be concealed or destroyed. A few more examples of repeated and multi-jurisdictional raids, not in the banking sector, but in the pharmaceutical sector. You may have heard or read about the raids on the pharmaceutical companies GSK, AstraZeneca, Pfizer and Merck, which took place as far back as 2008, which took place in the UK and France, Germany, US and Switzerland. And that was followed on in 2011 by an Italian raid by the Italian Competition Authority, who delved deeper into Pfizer for an abuse of dominant position inquiry, which ended up in a $10 million fine. And then in 2013, most recently, you've probably read about the Chinese police raiding GSK offices in China and the various arrests for bribery and corruption there. So it gives you a flavour of the repeated and sort of multi-pronged approach that many different regulators take, and they're clearly talking behind the scenes. So once they do knock on your door, what do they have the power to do? Obviously, they're there to investigate. You need to be aware, and this is something that would obviously be delved into deeper in the context of dawn raid training, but different regulators and different investigators have different powers depending on same jurisdiction or different jurisdiction. Generally, they have a power to search the premises, and they can seize documents, and they can also seize the documents and sift them off-site. So they may say, well, we don't have time to sit here all week and look through your hard drive or your email accounts, so we'll just pop them on a hard drive, take them away and have a look at them later, which obviously a pretty unnerving position for the recipient to think that someone's just taking all their data off-site without any control. They have the power to require you to give information, to give answers, and also documents. They also have power to carry out, well, certain regulators have a power to carry out interviews on site. But I'll come on to that a little bit later because it's a discrete sort of topic in itself. So the importance really of the main message of this talk really is that it is so important to be on standby and ready from the first moment that they walk through the front door of your office. The first thing to look at is to check the warrant that they come with, because not all regulators, as I've said, have the same powers, and it's important to know when you're looking at the warrant whether it has been obtained correctly, whether the data on the face of it is accurate. You may have read recently about a case involving the Cengiz brothers, who have been suing the Serious Fraud Office for a raid which took place in 2011. It's been very high profile, and I think at the time there were about 135 officials that basically arrived at the offices of the Cengiz brothers looking to investigate them. They took away computers and documents, and over the last 3 years it's been a battle for the Cengiz brothers to get damages, which I believe they asked for about 100 million and got about 3 million in the end, through a sort of a settlement plus their legal costs. But basically the warrant was invalid. And so this obviously is a reason why you need people on the ground, both internally and externally, who are able to examine the warrant. I'll come on to the details of that a little bit later, but the slightly worrying thing is that the only trigger that's required for them is to have a reasonable ground to suspect you for whatever it is that they're there to investigate. So it's a fairly low threshold. They're also entitled to bring along some IT experts, because obviously so much, if not all of our data is electronic these days. So they can turn up with their IT guys and ask you all sorts of questions about where you keep your data and how to get a hold of it. So what are the risks when you're facing an investigation? What is the risk, for example, of cooperating too little with investigators? There is a criminal offence of obstruction, so that's something that you have to be very aware of when you're dealing with them, particularly if you're the front line. Hence my question about receptionists, who, you know, arguably are the lowest level in the organisation, but they actually are the first people to deal with the investigators when they arrive, and they really need to be ready and trained and knowing what they're doing and knowing the basics of how to handle the arrival. The sort of financial penalties that have been handed out for obstructing investigations in different ways. I've set out a few examples here on the screen. Obstructing entry, for example, obviously this is something that will occur right at the very beginning of the raid. A Dutch company, KWS, was fined, their fine was uplifted by 2 million euros, and that was because they refused entry to the European Commission on the basis that they said that there were just no documents in the relevant director's office that the investigators were asking to see. So obviously that's something that can happen to anyone, really, if you happen to be the unlucky one who answers the door or the call from the regulator, and you say, actually, no, I'm not going to let you in. If you could wait in this office for 45 minutes while I call the people that I'd like to call, you could be facing an uplift, and I don't think anybody in this room would want to be the person that's responsible for tucking them away. If I'm not wrong, it was actually 47 minutes, the delay, and that was a 2 million euro fine. A Czech energy company was fined 2.5 million euros for diverting emails. This was back in 2009. They failed to block an email account at the request of the inspectors, and they didn't disclose relevant documents. So just that attracted a 2.5 million euro fine. And much more seriously, Aon was fined 38 million euros for tampering with a seal that had been placed by European Commission officers on an office door back in 2006. So you can see how seriously that sort of thing is looked upon by the courts after the event. Obviously, obstructing the raid is something that then puts your legal team on a back foot when they hopefully not too delayed arrive on the scene to deal with the aftermath. So what are the risks of too much cooperation? Obviously, if you open the doors, let them in, let them do exactly what they want to do and go wherever they want to go and talk to whoever they want to talk to, there's a serious disruption to your business just on a practical level. You run the risk, obviously, of providing information that may self-incriminate either your organisation or individuals within it. And you might obviously put yourself in a position where you prejudice your ability to defend later on. And also in the context of European Commission raids, you might compromise the company's ability to gain immunity from prosecution. In terms of cooperation, it's very important that if you're being raided, for example, in London, one of the first phone calls that really should be made, aside from calling the legal team and the senior management, is to understand if any of your other sites are being raided at the same time, because you want to ensure consistency of decision making across the board. You don't want your Paris office to be opening the doors and the London office being much more conservative. One very high-profile law firm that you certainly would have heard of had their office in Moscow raided, I believe, about 3 or 4 years ago, and it was in the context not of the law firm's activities, it was in relation to their client. And the Moscow regulator turned up with machine guns, which obviously was pretty unnerving for those at the front desk. And you just have to be aware that, you know, different regulators in different countries conduct themselves and have different powers to carry out their raids, and you need to be prepared and know exactly what to expect and how to handle it. I would hope that the UK regulators wouldn't turn up in that fashion, but never say never. So, what are the practicalities? My questions my slightly unkind questions at the beginning were sort of getting to this topic, which is what you need to have in place and what needs to be done on a regular basis to make sure that when it does happen, it isn't the bloodbath that it could possibly be. Obviously, having a dawn raid protocol is elementary. A, do you have one? B, is it up to date? Have you trained your people on it? And have you done, for example, a mock raid run through? There's nothing better really than doing something practical like that to make sure that everyone knows what it feels like, you know, to have questions fired at them and have people, you know, wanting to see data and computers, and make sure that everybody at different levels within the organisation know their role and how to handle it. As I've already said, does the receptionist have some kind of crib sheet? Is the manual, do you have several versions of the manual? One, for example, that assists the legal team on how or the in-house legal team on how they might conduct themselves? Do you have one that is for maybe middle-level management, which obviously will be less specific than the legal one? And do you have a contact list, an up-to-date one, that tells you who you should call, which management needs to be dragged into this, your numbers for your legal team? Is there a plan B, for example, if people are absent on holiday, maternity leave, etc.? Another very important aspect of preparation for dawn raids is to have a shadowing team, which is slightly further down the list. The shadowing team has a very important role. They work alongside the in-house legal team. If you have, as the Cengiz brothers had, 135 inspectors at the door, there's a lot of people running all over your office and all over your papers, and one of the very important things is to make sure that these people are followed, not in a sort of a stalker-like fashion, but they do need to be accompanied to make sure that they don't go where they shouldn't go, that they don't seize things without you knowing. So having bodies on the ground, one per inspector is ideal, making a note of where they go, what they do, who they speak to, what they ask for, what comments they make, what data they seize, what things they want photocopied is all really important in the sort of what I call the post-production part of a dawn raid, where obviously after the inspectors have gone, you all sit down and say, right, well, who went where and what did they do and what did they want, so that you can gain a little bit of focus on what exactly they're after. The warrant will only give you maybe a couple of lines on the scope of the investigation, so it's really what happens during the raid that is so crucial to understand. The other thing that is also crucial is where you have middle-level management or even low-level management, whose desks may be raided, they need to know how to behave. So this is where the list of do's and don'ts comes to the fore. They need to be told that they mustn't obstruct, that they need to be cooperative, polite even. Certainly no shredding of documents. In fact, shredders should be turned off. Mustn't delete emails or hide emails. And certainly no hiding of hard copy documents. We'd also suggest some kind of step-by-step guide, as I say, both for dealing with an external legal team, an internal raid team, internal legal team, and the team of shadowers. And you'll need this across jurisdictions, so what might be acceptable conduct in the face of a UK regulator may not be appropriate in front of a Russian regulator, for example. IT capability is another very important one, and they should certainly be on the list of contacts to call. The regulator may bring their own IT people, so it's very important for you to have your own on standby, because obviously they will take away electronic data. They may want to block email accounts. They may want to image hard drives. And so you need to know, for example, where your servers are. Is your data in the UK? Is it stored outside the jurisdiction? What are your backup procedures? These are all questions that the regulators may ask. So, do you know whether your data is backed up daily, weekly, monthly? How often is this data deleted? And so forth. Another important consideration is if your data is stored off-site, what if your data provider is raided? Do they have a dawn raid protocol, or will the regulator just knock on their door and they'll hand over everything? Obviously, legal expertise is obviously equally important, if not more so. There isn't actually a right to have a lawyer with you during a dawn raid. So if the inspectors decide to wait, it's really through their good grace. However, if the inspectors decide to carry out interviews or question people, then obviously there may well be a right. If it's a formal interview, particularly under caution by the Serious Fraud Office, you would definitely have a right to a lawyer and want a lawyer with you. DLA Piper's just carried out a very extensive global dawn raid program with a client where we provided training for them in 25 countries in 25 different languages. And during the course of that training, they actually set up, this particular client was very efficient and set up their specifically tailored sort of project team to deal with this. So it was very much an interface between external lawyers and internal lawyers. What sort of things should be covered in that training? Obviously, in-house lawyer training is an obvious one. Training people in the ability to validate the warrant, ensure that the scope and the powers are all clear to them. What to do if the address is wrong, for example. Do you turn inspectors away if they've written 51 Lime Street rather than 52, for example? Do you have a right to say on your bike, or do you have to let them in anyway? Is the warrant legal? What is the accusation? What specific documents are they asking for? What specific people do they want to talk to? Lessons in challenging inspectors. Obviously, you don't want to anger them too much. Equally, you don't want to hand over things that you don't necessarily have to. Local legal advice obviously is also crucial. Legal professional privilege and data protection are the two obvious ones. In the UK, for example, and in Europe, there is a different approach to privilege in respect of in-house lawyer communications, for example, and that's something that if the regulators are asking for communications between you sitting at your desk and what you might or might not have exchanged with the legal department, someone needs to know whether that can be handed over. There is a slightly strangely named process called blue bagging, which is where if there's a debate over whether something's legally privileged, you might agree to put things in a blue bag and then independent counsel will review whether it's privileged or not. That's not something that's hugely desirable. It'd be much better, in our view, if somebody asks you for an email between you and your lawyer, for you to be able to put it to one side, rather than have it just taken away and somebody somewhere is going to decide later whether it's privileged or not. But these are all things that would be covered in a comprehensive training. Interviews and questions. Again, this is a scary one for individuals who might be faced with questions by a regulator. How can you tell, for example, whether it's just a question about where something is or what it is or from whom it came, or whether it's actually bordering on an interview where they're asking you why something was done. You need to know whether that's a moment to put your hand up and say, actually, that's an interview. This is not just a general inquiry in the course of your raid. Do you need your own separate legal representation? In terms of after the raid, PR strategy is a big one. As I stated earlier, not every raid is in the public domain, thankfully. Some banks choose to actually disclose it themselves. Obviously, that's a decision for the PR team post-raid, and a difficult decision to make, obviously. Post-raid debriefs are part of what I call the post-production piece of a dawn raid, essential for everybody to go through what has happened, what has been seized, are particular individuals under the spotlight, and do they need their own legal representation. There will be also issues where your clients are under investigation, and that will be the main purpose of the raid. And in that context, obviously, tipping off is potentially a worry. What do you then do in terms of your relationship going forward with those clients when you know that they're under investigation? I'm conscious that I'm close to my half an hour, so I'll just finish off. So what do you do? DLA Piper Rapid Response, of course. This is our answer to all your problems. You'll see that we have offices in 33 countries. We've got relationship firms in 24 more, and we're rapidly growing. The Rapid Response app is something that you can download from our website for free, and it just means that you've got comfort that you've got a number to ring in the event that you're the poor person that's at the front line when the regulators arrive and you can't get hold of anybody because they're all on holiday or it's 6 o'clock in the morning and no one's awake. So I'll leave you with that. I've left some paperwork with George. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me now or later over a coffee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francesca.